Hi there. In this tutorial, we're going to create a photo box effect where we'll have these links, and when you hover over the link, it's going to sharpen a background image. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off in Terminal, and of course, if you're not familiar with Bash or the Unix command prompt or using Terminal, you can go ahead and just use Finder on Mac or your file browser on Windows to go ahead and create the same folders and file structure I'm going to create here in Terminal. So I'm going to start off by moving into my development folder, which is where I place all my projects, and I'm going to make a new folder inside of here, and I'm just going to call this one photo box links. And then I'll just go ahead and change into this particular folder. So now I'm inside of my photo box links project. And here I'm just going to create a couple different files. So first we're going to create an index.html page. And inside of this folder we'll also create a subfolder called CSS where our style sheets will live. And inside of here I'll make a style.css file. And I just want to make sure I'm putting it inside of the CSS folder there. Okay, so now my directory structure looks like this. I have my index page here, and then I have a CSS folder with my style.css in it. So I'll go ahead and open this up in my code editor. So I'm using Atom today, but you can use any code editor you like. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and bring up our index.html page, which is currently just a blank document. And I'm going to be using the Emmet plugin here, which is available for Atom, that allows you to do simple commands like bang symbol tab to create the basic HTML document structure. And right here for the title of the page, I'm just going to call this one photo box links. And inside of my body section here, I want to start off by creating an A tag. And for the href, which is the location where this link will go when we click it, I'm just going to put a pound symbol as a placeholder for right now. And then we're just going to open up this link here so we can place some other HTML elements inside of it. So the first HTML element I want to place inside of here will be an image element. And this is going to act as our background image. And then on top of that, we want to put some text. So I'm going to put an H1 here to make a level 1 heading. And inside of this, I'll just write title 1 to just give it a generic title that will appear on top of our link. Now for the alt text, I'll just write background. And for the source attribute, which is the location where it looks for our image, we're actually going to be using a image placeholder site, which is at https://placeimage.com/ and here we can put the size of our image we want to load, and we'll say 300 by 200. And this is just an arbitrary size that I chose. You can make the size anything that you like for your particular site. And then by saying /nature, it's going to automatically load a random nature image at this particular size from this website. Okay, so let's go ahead and save our index page, and I'd like to preview this in the browser just to make sure this small bit of it is working at this point. So I'm going to go back to my terminal, and I'm going to call open on my index page, and this is going to bring it up in Chrome here. So here I can see my 300 pixel by 200 pixel placeholder image that's getting loaded in from placeimage.com, and here I can see my H1. And because this is wrapped inside of an A tag, all of this is clickable. So next let's work on styling this using CSS. So I'm going to jump back over to my code editor, and I'd like to link to my CSS file here that's inside the CSS folder. So inside the head section, I'm going to create a link element and point its href here to css/style.css to load that particular file there. And then we'll go ahead and save. And then we're going to jump into that file. So I'm just going to open my style.css here. So I might have all sorts of different links in my website, and I only want certain links to behave as a little photo box. So it's going to benefit me to actually create a unique class for that. So I'm going to name my class photo box, And a few things I want to specify for my photo box is I want to tell them to display Inline-Block. And the reason why I'd like to do this is I want to give a width and a height to the image here. And I'm going to set it to be the same as the dimensions of my picture that I placed inside of the link, which was 300 pixels wide and 200 pixels tall. Now by default, A tags, or HTML link elements, they don't have the ability to be given a width or a height because they display inline by default. So by setting it to display inline block, it allows them to still be positioned side by side as links typically are, but it gives us this ability to apply a height and a width, and now our element will actually accept and apply this height and width. The other thing we'd like to do is we'd like to set it to position relative. And this is going to come in handy later. We'll actually come back to this and talk about it as we move on a little bit later in the exercise. So now I'd like to apply this class of PhotoBox to my link here in my HTML page. So I'll just come into my A tag here and we'll go ahead and set it to have a class equal to PhotoBox. And then we're going to go ahead and save that. Back to style.css here. The next thing we'd like to do is we would like to position the image and the heading right on top of each other. So remember before we set the photo box to position relative. Now we can actually use CSS descendant selectors to target the elements that are inside of photo box, and we can give them absolute positioning, and then we're going to be able to kind of overlap them and pull them one on top of the other. So I'm going to use a descendant selector by saying .photobox space and then img, which will actually target images that are inside of PhotoBox. So in this case, it's going to target this image here that's located inside of this element with the class of PhotoBox. And then I'm going to use a comma to create a compound selector to say that I also want to select the H1 element that's inside of PhotoBox. So this will allow me to select both the image inside of PhotoBox and the H1s that are inside of PhotoBoxes. And then I'm going to be able to apply the same CSS rules to both. So in this case, I want to set them to position absolute. And we want to set the top position here to 0. So normally when you set an element to position absolute, top refers to the top of the browser window. But remember, we set position relative here on the PhotoBox link itself. So whenever you have a absolutely positioned child inside of a relatively positioned parent, the commands like top, bottom, left, and right are actually referring to the top, bottom, left, and right of the relative parent. So when I say top 0, it means to move the image and also the H1 in this case to the very top or 0 pixels at the top edge of our PhotoBox parent that they're inside of. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to tell images and H1s here to have a width of 100%, so they stretch just as wide as they can inside of the photo box. I want them to occupy all of the available space inside of our photo box, and we also want to set a height to them. In this case, I also want to say 100% so that it's taking up all of the available height inside of the photo box. So let's go ahead and save our style.css, and I'm going to jump back to the browser and see if that worked. So we'll go ahead and refresh here, and the good news is that our H1 is now sitting on top of our image there. Now jumping back to our style.css, I would like to apply some styles individually to the image element and the H1. So we'll use our same descendant selector there. We'll say .photobox space img to target and apply styles to just the image. So here, because we had the comma, these particular CSS declarations are being applied to both the image and the H1. And in this case, we're only applying it to the image. So here I'd like to use the CSS filter property, and I'd like to apply a blur, and I'd like to set the blur amount to 2 pixels. So if I go ahead and save this and come back to the browser and refresh, we should see this image here getting blurred out. So you can see this is now softened and blurred. Now this filter property will only work in modern browsers. If you're using the newest version of Chrome, Safari, or Firefox, this should work just fine. Now in older versions of IE, there's actually different commands for filter. At this time, I'm not going to bother putting in all of the different polyfills and browser prefixes for making filter work in older browsers, but I'll go ahead and provide a link to that in the resources underneath this video. Next, we want to provide the CSS property called transition. What transition will do is it will allow us to watch a particular CSS property. In this case, I want to watch filter. So anytime there's a change on filter, anytime I adjust the filter through some event state in the browser, it's going to watch that and apply some type of transition. Now in this case, it's going to fade, and the second argument we give transition here is the amount of time it will take to transition between the two different states of filter changing. In this case, it's going to start out at 2 pixels, and later on, coming up here, we're going to provide a hover effect. So let's go ahead and do that at this time. Let's select photo box and call :hover on it, which means when we're hovering over top of the photo box, and then space image so that we can adjust the filter here on this particular image when we're hovering over photo box. So here, instead of 2 pixels, we're going to set this to 0 pixels. So let's go ahead and save this and come back to the browser and refresh, and we'll test our hover effects. So here's my mouse, and you'll see that when we hover over our image, you can see that the image is actually sharpening, and it's taking 500 milliseconds to change between its 2 pixel blur to its 0 pixel blur. Next, we'll jump back over to our style.css, and we'd like to apply some styles to our H1 that's inside of PhotoBox. So first of all, I would like to make the H1 actually appear in the center of my element. So right now it's appearing in the top left corner, and I'd like it to always be centered. We're going to make use of a new CSS3 display property called Flexbox. So we're going to set here the H1 to display flex. And now that we've set it to display flex, we have access to a library of CSS properties that will allow us to position and center that H1. The first one we're going to look at is called justify content. And here you can actually specify whether the content is pulled to the left side or the right side or centered in the middle here, which is what we want. So we're going to go ahead and set this to center. And furthermore, we want to adjust the property called align items. Now, align items will allow you to vertically align the content. So here, justify content is affecting the horizontal alignment of our H1, and the align items property is adjusting the vertical alignment. Now, H1s on their own have default margin in the browser. For example, you can see here there's a little bit of space. So we want to go ahead and get rid of that margin so that we're actually aligning it in the true center, and we'll do that by setting margin to 0. So let's go ahead and save this and come back to the browser and refresh. And now you can see that our Title 1 text is indeed right in the middle of our image there. Now, in order to make this text pop a little bit more and stand out nicely from the image, I'm going to be using primarily colorful images here, and I'd like my text to actually be white. So let's go ahead and set the color of the text here to white, because we're going to be using this with maybe many different image backgrounds, and we want to make it as flexible as possible. We might get in a situation where the background has some white in it. So in order to make the text pop a little bit more, we're going to use the CSS text shadow property to add a little bit of a black shadow underneath our text. So here we'll go ahead and set the horizontal offset to 0, which means that it won't make the shadow appear to the left or the right of the text. It will actually just be centered. And then the second value here is the vertical offset, and here we'll set this to 5 pixels, which will make our shadow fall 5 pixels below our text. And the third value here is the blur radius, or the feathering, which we'll set to 10 pixels. And the last value here is the color. Now, we could just use the color black because that's what I'd like mine to be, but I'm going to make this flexible for you by adding in the RGBA value. So you would be able to put the first three values here would be the red, green, and blue color. So since mine's just black, I can set it to 0 for the red, green, and blue. But you could change this to any color you want. You could use a image editor like Photoshop to eyedrop a particular color, and then you could fill in those red, green, and blue values here. Now the fourth value in RGBA is the alpha, which is the transparency. So if you did a number like 0.5 for the alpha, that would be 50% transparent in this case. It would be actually see-through. So in our case, we're just going to do solid black, so I'll set that to 1. So here 1 represents 100%, 0 would represent 0% or completely transparent, and again 0.5 would represent 50% transparent. So again, we'll just leave that at 1. Next, we'd like to set the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and change the font size to 1.5M. And lastly, I would like to actually use a different font. So this is just the default browser font you can see appearing here. And I'd like to go ahead and make use of a Google font. So I'm going to open up a new tab in the browser. And we'll just go to google.com/fonts. And in the search over here on the right hand side, we're going to search for Lato, L-A-T-O. And here it is. So in order to add this font to our collection, we just click this little plus button here. And down here, there's a little tray that opens up, and if you click it, it'll bring this window open. And the way we're going to embed this is we're going to use the @import method in our CSS style sheet. So I'm going to click the @import tab here. And the only part we need to copy here is the @import command that's in between our opening and closing style tags there. So we'll go ahead and copy that and jump back to our code editor. And I'm going to scroll to the very top of our CSS file here. And I'm going to paste that @import command in there. Okay, so now we're importing in our Google font called Lato. And then we can scroll down to the usage here. In order to specify using this font in our CSS, we can copy this font family command here. So we'll go ahead and copy that. And we'll go ahead and scroll down to our code, and we'll paste in the font family property set to Lato and defaulting to any sans serif font there you like. So we'll go ahead and save our code. We'll jump back to the browser and we will refresh. And now you can see our font applied there. And if we hover over our image, you can see the image sharpening. And if we click this, this would take us to whatever we specify in the href attribute here, which we currently just have set to hashtag. So we can actually duplicate this just to show you what this would look like if you had many of these on the page. Let's go ahead and copy our A tag here, and we'll paste this in 3 more times. And because we want these nature images to be different for each one, we'll go ahead and set this one to nature/2, nature/3, and nature/4. And we'll also update the H1 here to say title 2, title 3, and title 4. So we can go ahead and save our index page, jump back to the browser, and refresh. So you'll see that each link here is clickable, and when we hover over each image, it will sharpen.